fourfold temptations, like the four winds blowing tempestuously upon the sea of the world, for the four bounds of heaven, from the four bounds of heaven, lashing the waves to fury, beating down upon the bark of your soul, so is temptation fourfold. 2, from the flesh, from the world, from the devil, from God. We are tempted by the flesh when we are solicited to sin by the natural urge of passion, as in the case of impurity or gluttony. Every man is tempted by his own concupiscence, being drawn away and allured. James 1:14. Similarly, that temptation is of the flesh, which prompts our delicacy to shrink back in distaste from those labors and efforts in spiritual matters on which we ought to be intent, like prayer. People in the world don't pray. Somebody came up to me and thought that was strange. I think it's because they do pray, and I wanted to make a show of it, but they thought it was strange when I started talking about how people in the world don't pray. But they say certain prayers, but they do a lot of activity because this stuff's hard. Thus, from two sides does the flesh assault us, inciting us to evil, holding us back from good. Again, although anger, envy, and vainglory would seem to pertain to the soul rather than to the flesh, still it is from corrupt human nature that these spiritual disorders spring. The devil is often spoken of as suggesting them, but the material for all such temptation is within us, so that even if there were no devils at all, our concupiscence would suffice of itself to their consent. Consent is given to produce sin, where consent is given to produce sin. And again, this is one of the things, like people that use those phones, it's basically impossible for them not to fall into all kinds of sins like this, because all the external stimulation that comes from a phone, whether you're using it for nasty stuff or not, it disturbs everything inside. So even though they're not maybe particularly looking up nasty things, they're spending all their time flipping with their thumb through all these different pictures and images and things, popping into their mind's eye, one after another. This thing jiggling, that thing bouncing, that other thing dinging. It's all this kind of nonsense, and they just inundate themselves with it. What that does, it disturbs the interior so badly, it actually causes temptations to arise. From all kinds of things, even just from the simple fact of being, I don't know the word for it just being disturbed inside. It just disturbs everything inside. And that's what causes some people to lose their temper, other people to fall into, desire to kind of latch onto some sensual thing, whether it's a perversion or it's an indulgence in food or some other kind of thing, because they're disturbed inside, and now they're looking to satisfy that disturbance, calm the disturbance. Because people that live according to their flesh, and most people do live according to their flesh, you even hear it in the spiritual life all the time, people basically feel a certain way, so they act on that. A lot of that comes from their flesh, dictating what they should and shouldn't do. And since they live according to the flesh, they're going to satisfy that flesh. And what it means is this: it doesn't necessarily mean that there's somebody that wants to dive off the diving board, do filthy things. What it means is that they want that peace and harmony, but they won't do the proper thing to get the peace and harmony. And that proper thing would be to practice recollection and not be staring at a phone all the time with it bouncing and jiggling and making all kinds of funny noises and stuff, with them looking at one thing after another and all this stuff happening, with them constantly pulling it out of their pocket and seeing what it's doing. By doing all of that, by receiving all of that input that goes inside and it gets all disturbed, they're looking for a way to calm something down that they don't even know they're disturbed by, because they're so used to that being part of their daily life. And we have to look at that in religious life too. I mean, of course, it's not to that degree. We don't use those stupid phones. but it could be that you feel disturbed inside from something because the body does what it does. But a master in the spiritual life has to be able to understand that the body's doing something. It's poking me with something right now. It's trying to push me towards something right now. And then you know what to mortify. You know where to be on your guard. People in the world, unfortunately, because they're so used to those stupid phones and being able to run from one difficulty to alleviate it with something else, they actually oftentimes are completely oblivious to this. All they know is they want peace, and they'll get it at almost any cost. And so you have good, virtuous people that don't really know they're doing these things. And little by little, they develop these terrible habits. So we carry within ourselves all the requisite for sin. That is, mind and will, imagination and bodily senses. It is these we win or lose. It's with these we win or lose. Yet God gave them to us as instruments of virtue, to do great things with them here, and to build up a home for ourselves in heaven. And all of those faculties are to be used in prayer. Equipped with them, we are meant to serve our Creator. As weapons, we have been entrusted with them to do battle against our enemy, the devil. He, or his on his side, is unarmed. Only by cunning can he reach us, inviting, but not constraining us to sin. I still hear it sometimes. I talk to people and they blame God for not taking away all the temptations right away. They'll just blame God for it. And you see what they're doing. They're actually they're colluding with the devil, because the devil himself is the one causing them all of this pain and vexation. And then they pray, it doesn't go away because they don't want to actually do what's needed to make the thing go away. They just want God to take it away because they're a little baby. And then they get mad at God for it. So you see, the devil wins twice. He gets to bother them with the temptation, probably make them fall, and then get them to blaspheme by saying God's responsible for it. Our merciful Creator has not left to our enemy any compelling power before which our frailty must needs bend. Were this so, we could hardly continue without sin. Powers of persuasion alone are allowed him, and it rests with ourselves to give or withhold assent. Moreover, again, that's why we have to be very much on our guard for paying attention to what's going on internally. And again, to point at the people in the world who are constantly staring at those stupid phones, because they're mesmerized by the stupid phone and they let it guide everything that they do, they're not going to know the difference what's going on inside of them, usually. But someone who wants to seek mastery in the spiritual life, which is necessary for heaven, then they have to be free of those things, practicing recollection. That's why we have. But even with us, if you're not paying attention to it, you're too focused on your work or some ailment that you have, or some difficulty with a different brother or whatever else, or a superior, or you have you just start to get this idea in your head about something that you'd like to do someday, and you keep thinking about that as though it's God's will. All of these kind of waste of time or temptations or distractions that we receive, if we're not attentive to those, then they build momentum. And that's what starts to take us away from our recollection, starts to disturb us. Next thing you know, you're in crisis, but you think it's everybody else's fault. That's just kind of the way the whole thing works. Power, persuasion alone are allowed him, and it rests with ourselves to give or withhold assent. Moreover, we have been forewarned. Implacable enmity has been set between the serpent and man, so that the latter may know how to view the suggestions that may be made to him. How could so cruel an enemy, whose one aim is to bring about our eternal loss, give us wise counsel. And that's, I'm telling you, I hear this stuff on the phone all the time talking to people. Basically, you can see they want to accept the counsel of the devil. They want to presume that this is God's will. Because what it is he's suggesting to them something that sounds good. Because he knows as long as you step away from this exalted thing you're striving for and do something else that's good, but not as exalted because you think it's God's will, then you step away from that, he can throw something else in your way. And then he'll pull you away with that, then he'll throw something else in your way. Next thing you know, you're way off course. That's the difficulty with leaving a better thing for a good thing. Do you see? People have to be very, very attentive. But the only way to do that is be present. And if they're on those stupid phones, or if we're distracted by our work or whatever else it is, you're not present. You're thinking about all kinds of other stuff. We have to be aware of what's going on around us, meaning spiritually. Temptation is simply the devil's demand to hand over our weapons. His purpose achieved, he will either use them to destroy us or at least return them to us blunted, dull of edge, less fitted to be of value to us, less apt to be effective against himself. Thus, remember that story I told you about the friar who talked himself into leaving his community for a while, only to come back later on. And when he did, he said before he left, obedience was sweet to him. Obedience was something he just excelled at. He was able to be obedient to anything. When he came back, it was the hardest thing he'd ever done. It was a complete martyrdom every time he had to obey something. And so he still had obedience, he was still obeying, but the devil talked him into, or he allowed himself to be talked into compromising or rethinking his vocation instead of keeping his hand on the plow and going forward. And then when he finally snapped back into his senses after a few years and realized, no, this is my vocation and I'm to hold on to my vocation, his vocation became a martyrdom to him. So the devil gave it back to him blunted. Thus, when he fills the mind with evil thoughts and urges us to say or do what is wrong, is he not as much as admitting openly, I can do nothing against you unless you lend me your weapons to wound and slay you? Pretty magnificent. Surrender to me, then, your imagination, that it may harbor those evil thoughts and base affections. Surrender to me your tongue, that it may utter these evil words, and your bodily senses, that they may embark on these evil practices. And thus shall a mortal wound be inflicted on your soul, and you shall lose the grace of God, and be despoiled of the merit of heavenly glory. What do you think about that one? What a fool is he who consents to all this, and it is to himself he should impute the harm done, and not to the prompting of his foe, or to God, because nowadays they don't even blame the devil, they just blame God for it. He is his own enemy. Yield not your members, says St. Paul, yield not your members as instruments of iniquity unto sin, Romans 6:13. But present yourselves to God as those that are alive from the dead, and your members as instruments of justice unto God. The world tempts us in two ways: by offering what draws us to it, such as honors, wealth, pleasure, idle trifles, adulation, and so forth, or by frightening us with persecution, contumely, spoliation, and the like. That's one of the ways it tempts us. So to fulfill something in us because we want to be bigger than we really are, or it makes us afraid of stuff and we're scared to death to lose what we have. As for the devil, those at work in every kind of temptation in two ways, especially if he want to infest us. Where he finds souls making some progress in God's service, he may try to undermine their faith by instilling thoughts of blasphemy and many other kindred suggestions, from all of which we would normally shrink in abhorrence, and even going so far as to introduce thoughts of depression or of suicide, though at times these may be occasioned by other causes, like psychological ones. But I was talking to somebody on the phone yesterday, and they said once they started increasing a little bit more in the spiritual life, they joined a beautiful Marian confraternity and started listening to conferences on spiritual warfare. Their life got miserable at that point. And then the blame was on God. The blame was on God. They're trying to do this good thing, and this is how God treats them. Any of us would know exactly what happened there. That person belonged to the devil. He knew, she's mine. She's mine. And as soon as she started striving to pull herself out of that, he started coming down hard on her until she blamed God for it. You see? Very common. Very common. But when we want, and that the indicator there, the faith indicator or meter, the faith meter there indicates that person there, their spirituality has to do with themselves. And you can see that the simple thing that has to change there is to put God at the center and them to be a servant. That's the only thing that has to happen. And there you go. They'll understand exactly what's happening to them, and they'll be ready to fight. But because basically it's a sign of worldliness. And it's okay. It's not like it's the end of the world to have somebody like that. It means immaturity in the faith. So all you have to do is recognize it and stop being immature in the faith. And now you have somebody who is ready to serve God, and because God constantly gives all the grace to fight against these stupid things. It's just that if we're not aware of it, then we blame God for it and don't accept any of his grace to fight against it. We say, he's taken his grace from me. No, he hasn't taken his grace from you. That's what those are words people actually say. He hasn't taken his grace from you. He's trying to give you grace, but you're blaming him for everything the devil's doing to you. This is the problem. Thus he cunningly succeeds, sometimes in supplanting the unweary, and in drawing away from good those whom by other means he would certainly fail to seduce. Here is the noonday devil of the psalmist. That's 96. The angel of Satan, of whom St. Paul speaks, 2 Corinthians 11:14, who transforms himself into an angel of light. Now, just to understand that, I know you all understand it, but the devil doesn't just go around like making spiders crawl in and out of your mouth while you're sleeping and make you get scared and stuff like that when you're going to the bathroom at nighttime. That's not just what the devil does, do you see? No, what the devil does is he tries to show up and be this beautiful being that shows you a better way than what God can give you. That's what the devil does. And so you follow that better way until he destroys you completely. And you find yourself completely riddled with filth. You see, that's what the devil does. But he does it because he shows himself glamorous. And that's what he means by an angel of light. Who transforms himself into an angel of light. Though he is the prince of darkness, our Lord called him the father of lies, and the source of evil, still in pursuit of his wicked purposes, he cunningly pretends to teach what is good and feigns to enlighten souls that he may engulf them in the darkness of sin. Understand, this is just, David of Augsburg is absolutely just a very wise. Still in pursuit of his wicked purpose, he cunningly pretends to teach what is good. This is what we hear from vocations who talk themselves out of their vocation. You see they have a vocation, and then they have something, some lesser good that's presented to them, and they'll completely talk themselves into it with every kind of example of why they're being called that way and why it's God who's doing it. And you just look at them like, this is the most ridiculous thing I've ever. It's so obvious, but there's nothing you can do because the devil has given them all of these pretend fantasies. That's why it's all better, and they're the apple of God's eye now. God never tempts to evil. He has no pleasure in destruction. He wishes all men to be saved. 1 Timothy 2:4. But he is sometimes spoken of as tempting men when, for example, he puts them to the test by their own instruction, for their own instruction, and that of others, as was the case of Job and Tobias. Or again, when he makes some great demands upon a person's generosity, as he did with Abraham. Here the command was to sacrifice his only and dearly loved son, an heir to the divine promise. And its purpose was to show forth to all ages the sublime obedience of Abraham and his unswerving confidence that even in despite of death, God would fulfill the promise he had made. Now, some temptations are best dealt with by confronting them boldly and mastering them. And I think this is the real reason why we get so many temptations. Because, well, not so many temptations. Some people don't get a whole lot of temptations. But when the difficulty befalls us, a better way to say it for us to understand, it's so that we can get stronger. Because if you never got tempted, and the way I try to explain it to these poor parents out there, that it's funny because they know about children, but they don't know how they act with God. The way they act with God oftentimes is how their children act with them. And so when you start giving them examples about their children, they understand completely. And then you ask them, do you not see that you're treating God the same way your child's treating you? Do you see that when your child screams and yells and you say, stupid little child, you know that you have to walk you have to get muscles so you can walk. You can't just keep sitting there and screaming. So I'm going to make you, though you're screaming, I'm going to make you walk a little bit because you don't know what you're doing. And then when God does that to us, you just scream and yell, and then you think you're a big boy now, and you start yelling at God as though he should know better than to make you try to walk a little bit more and get a bit stronger. Do you see? They understand it when you apply it to the child, but they don't understand it when God's using it for them. I gave a talk to a group of children, and I tried to help them understand how when they acted like that, that's the way their parents sometimes acted with God. And they got it right away. The kids got it. They're like, oh yeah, Mom and Dad do the same thing we do with them. Yeah, they do the same thing, but they do it with God. So I was trying to help them understand why they should not do that with their parents, and they should learn from their parents not to do that from God, but to act properly all the time. They seem to get it. I don't know if you never know in the end. Thus, chastity is more secured when we are but little in the company of the opposite sex. There is no difficulty in abstaining from delicate food and drink or from superfluity. Where abundance is lacking, avarice should be less likely to assault men who have left all for Christ and choose voluntary poverty than those who possess the world's goods, are necessarily anxious to hold and to amass them. Like St. Francis says, if we have a bunch of stuff we have to get weapons. It's just so funny hearing St. Francis say, if we have a bunch of stuff, we have to take out weapons and defend ourselves. Oh, goodness. However, though flight may sometimes seem to secure us immunity from the pressures, strong and persistent, of interior vice, still such immunity is really the result of the absence of occasion. As soon as this recurs, the attack is wont to be heavier than ever. A lion set free and is all the more dangerous from being long chained. And so that's a good example. We'll stop right there, but that's a good example for us, since we can't you have to keep in mind. I was telling you before, like when I'd have to go to Rome, I'd prepare for a couple days if I had a few days notice, because you get assaulted by stuff that we're not out there anymore. We're not used to seeing all the ridiculous stuff they do, the spandex they're dressing in, and all the. You go to the airport, I'm telling you, it's probably worse than Walmart nowadays. They always talk about Walmart being a funny place to go to. The airport's even worse. It's better not to go there. But anyways, we have to be attentive, because if we're going to go out there, we can't just presume we've gotten strong. This is also can be a stumbling block. You presume you've gotten strong enough now, and that these things don't bother you anymore, and then you go out there in the world, and there you go. You're hit by all these things that you're just not used to. They're not around us anymore, which is a grace. That's why we come here, to be separated from the nonsense that's out there, and to try to focus on God and not have to be battling with that all the time. But if we do have to go out there, because we are apostolic men, and that's what apostolic men do, we have to prepare ourselves to go out there, and God's grace should sustain us if we cooperate with it.
I guess my part to just raise awareness, if you're not already, just the importance of this project, because as I'm sure you're aware, that if we can't make the payment on the property, the project cannot move forward, and we could even potentially lose the progress that's already been made if we can't make the payment on the property. So there was something I'd come across here that I wanted to share with you. That's from our Holy Father St. Francis. He says, "There's a contract between the world and the friars. They owe a good example to the world. The world must provide them with what is necessary. When they fraudulently hold back the good example, the world in just rebuke withholds its hand." So I think that we could all agree, just given, I'm sure, all the benefits that we all receive from Anthony's formations and the good example of his friars. If you've had the good fortune to be able to spend any amount of time with them, they are most certainly holding up their end in providing the good example. And so I think it's only just that we then not withhold our hand and do whatever it is that we can.